It was supposed to be just another school field trip, the kind that broke up the monotony of classes and let us escape into the outside world for a day. My junior year of high school, our history teacher arranged a visit to an old Civil War battlefield in Virginia. The site had been preserved for decades, a sprawling expanse of grass, stone monuments, and weathered wooden fences stretching for miles. I wasn't particularly interested in history, but the idea of getting out of school for a full day was enough to make me sign up. My best friend, Tyler, was coming too, which made it even better. We planned to ditch the guided tour as soon as we could and explore the less traveled paths on our own. The trip started off normally enough. The bus ride took 3 hours, during which our teacher droned on about famous battles and historical figures. When we arrived, the park ranger greeted us, giving a short lecture before letting us roam in small groups. Tyler and I wasted no time veering off from the main group, slipping away down a narrow dirt trail that led deeper into the forested part of the battlefield. It didn't take long before we realized we were alone. The air felt unnaturally still, the kind of silence that made your ears ring. The trees loomed high above us, their branches tangling together to block out most of the sunlight. There was something eerie about it. This was the place where men had fought and died, their blood soaking into the earth. As we walked further down the path, we came across a small clearing with an old wooden signpost, barely legible from years of decay. The only word we could make out was cemetery. A short distance away, partially hidden by the overgrowth, was a rusted iron fence. Behind it, maybe a dozen crumbling headstones stood in uneven rows, their engravings so faded that only a few letters remained. Some had fallen over entirely, the grass reclaiming them. "I bet this is where the real ghost stories come from," Tyler joked, nudging me. I smirked, but the truth was, I didn't like the way the place made me feel. It wasn't fear exactly, more like a quiet pressure, a weight on my chest that hadn't been there before. That's when we heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere deeper in the woods behind the cemetery. We froze, listening. The steps were uneven, like someone dragging their foot slightly with each stride. It was subtle, but definitely there. And worse, it was getting closer. "Hello," Tyler called out. Nothing. The footsteps continued, crunching over fallen leaves and twigs. Then, just as suddenly as they started, they stopped. I turned to Tyler, expecting him to say something, but his face had gone pale. His eyes weren't on me anymore. They were locked onto the fence, or more specifically, onto the figure standing just beyond it. At first, I thought it was another student, someone from our class who had wandered off like we did. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized how wrong I was. The man, if you could call him that, was dressed in tattered old clothing, a uniform of some kind. His features were barely visible beneath the shade of his hat, but his stance was unnatural, rigid, like he wasn't breathing. Then he moved, not a step forward, not a shift of weight. He just twitched. A sudden jerk of his head, his neck cracking to one side like a puppet on strings. That was enough. I grabbed Tyler's arm, yanking him backward. "Run!" We bolted. I didn't look back, didn't dare. We ran until my lungs burned, until my legs threatened to give out. We didn't stop until we saw the parking lot in the distance, the safety of the bus and our classmates still milling around. By the time we turned back, the path behind us was empty. Nothing. No figure. No sound. Neither of us said a word about it to the teacher, to our classmates, to anyone. But later that night, after we were back home, I got a text from Tyler. It was just a blurry picture, something he must have snapped while we were running. The cemetery fence was visible in the shot. So were the headstones, and standing among them, just as before, was the figure. Only this time, he was looking straight at the camera,